Tropical warmth and brilliant colours are not typical of most British homes. But there is a way of bringing a little piece of the exotic into the living room. Millions of enthusiasts keep tropical fish, yet only a few experts are aware of their fascinating private lives. So how do these vividly colourful fish, with their colourful names like fighter and archer, behave in the wild? The aquarists' fishes come from all over the world. The mouth-brooding tilapia from Africa, Thailand's Siamese fighting fish, and the predatory snakehead, another native of Southeast Asia. The USA, Mexico, India and Australia all produce their quota. But one of the most abundant sources of all is Lake Malawi in Africa. All the fish in this very long and very deep lake are unique to this place. So large is the world demand for tropical fish that overfishing could soon threaten even Malawi's great stocks. Netting is strictly controlled. The commoner fish are landed by seine netting, in the lake itself and in the River Shire that flows out of it to the south. The rarest and most valuable specimens are caught by divers, operating in water up to 35 meters deep around Lake Malawi's island. New species are still being found in the lake. How do these exotic creatures reach the fish tank in the living room? First, they're transferred to holding tanks in filtered water, where they can clean themselves. For shipment, they're transferred to plastic bags and given a shot of neat oxygen, some of which will dissolve in the water and sustain them during their journey. Plastic bags are packed in containers insulated against damage and transport and extremes of temperature. After that, everything depends on speedy airport handling and the flight running to schedule. 36 hours is the maximum desirable travelling time. After that, losses begin to mount as oxygen runs out. Next stop, the dealers. From here on, the fate of the fish depends on the skill of their new owner. Few aquarists will see their tank inhabitants behaving quite as they would in the wild. To stimulate these fish to breed and behave naturally, conditions must be made as natural as possible. India's dwarf gourami is a labyrinth fish, so called because, in addition to gills, it has a labyrinth of blood vessels that enable it to breathe surface oxygen. It needs this double breathing system because the muddy waters of the Ganges and the Brahmaputra rivers in which it lives are extremely low in dissolved oxygen. This is the male. Those long streamers are really pelvic fins. They've evolved to help the gourami feel its way around the bottom in murky water. The fascinating thing about this fish is that in the spawning season, it uses air for much more than breathing. It blows a series of bubbles at the surface to create a nest, using special cement glands to give each bubble a burst-proof coating. It also builds with weed, which it carries to the surface and anchors to the bubbles. The stones attached to the weed filament make things a little more difficult. The female gourami is a silvery version of the male. When she arrives, he courts her by turning on his side, showing off his gaudy flanks. The Siamese fighting fish is a bubble nester too. The female is much less colourful. The male Siamese fighter is one of the stars of the tropical fish world. Anyone who has kept fighters and put two males in a tank, or even in adjoining tanks, will be aware of their pugnacity. But they have other, even more interesting characteristics. Breeders have produced a whole range of vivid blues and reds, but in the wild, the male is dark, almost black. As they fight, they maneuver to butt each other in the gills. They're partial air breathers too, and a blow with a snout in the region of the gills and labyrinth wins and sometimes kills a rival. The probable reason for the male's aggressiveness is that nesting space is hard to find in the muddy streams and lakes in which these fish live. Siamese fighters and dwarf gourami belong to the same family, the anabantids. In both species, it's the male who builds the nest. The male not only builds and guards the bubble nest, but even looks after the newly hatched young, at least for the first few days. After that, he's liable to eat them. Even the female is in danger of being driven away or attacked by the male. Here's the reverse process. A female chasing a male. When courtship really begins, the female takes her place next to the male. She undulates her fins. He responds by arching his body sideways. Eventually, he needs to encircle her. His objective is to wrap his body round hers to help squeeze the eggs out so that he can fertilize them. This male is not successful. These paradise fish are more adept. They're anabantids too. The word means to journey up, in their case, in order to build the bubble nest and to take surface air. This pair is evidently satisfied with the nest and ready to start spawning. The male uses his pectoral fins almost like arms as he embraces the female. A pair will sometimes keep this courtship up for hours. At last, the male succeeds. Paradise fish was one of the first exotics to be imported to Europe. A collector first brought it to Paris in 1861. It's hardy and easy to keep, though only a lucky enthusiast sees its courtship routine in such close detail. The male becomes more colourful, while the female remains dull. The eggs are squeezed into the bubble nest. The male's fertilizing milt, which is shed at the same time, is invisible. Unlike the eggs of the other anabantids, those of the paradise fish float. The male pushes them into a position where they will get most benefit from the oxygen in the bubbles. The bubbles are sufficient protection for the eggs, which take about 2 days to hatch. Meantime, the male stands guard over the eggs and newly hatched young. But some tropical fish are even more protective of their offspring. In the sea, members of the shark family bear their young in this way. Some of the most successful freshwater live bearers are the molly family. These are golden mollies. When they're breeding, the males expend enormous amounts of energy chasing females, with their dorsal fins raised in display. As soon as the female submits to his attentions, the male mates with her. This is a pregnant female, feeding voraciously on water fleas for both herself and about 70 unborn young. She's about to give birth to a miniature shoal of young mollies. Being born this size is not particularly advantageous to the young mollies. Their parents will sometimes eat them. When not practicing infanticide, mollies in the wild will eat a lot of vegetable food. This certainly isn't true of the snakehead from Southeast Asia. The snakehead itself stalks its prey like a pike and has much the same predatory equipment, with a pointed head and even more pointed teeth. Its rapacious behavior is the obvious reason why it's not as common in fish collections as other species. The snakehead can exist for a long time out of water, provided it remains slightly moist. It breathes surface air with a piece of equipment similar to that possessed by the labyrinth fishes. In complete contrast, the glass catfish is peaceful with the other species who share its home waters in Indonesia. The catfish's internal organs are visible in the silver sac towards the front of its body. Being transparent gives this inoffensive fish excellent camouflage against any background. In the fish's world, the males may bear the most resplendent livery, but they also seem to do most of the work at breeding time. Tilapia mosambica specializes in hard labor. In this species of cichlid from Africa, the male not only assumes a beautiful metallic blue at breeding time, he develops specially thick lips for shifting anything from sand to small boulders. Watched by several females, he excavates a nest. Occasionally, they break off to feed. These tilapia are mouth brooders. In fact, It is sometimes believed that after the female lays her eggs in the nest that the male has excavated, she picks them up in her mouth, where they are actually fertilized. Others think fertilization takes place in the nesting hollow. What is certain is that she carries the fertilized eggs in her mouth. Outside, they quickly go moldy and die. After 10 days, the young hatch and swim cautiously out of their mother's mouth, but stay within close range. At this stage, the male may forget his parental responsibilities and swallow some of his offspring. The female is always present to take them inside her mouth again if danger threatens. Miraculously, she never seems to swallow one by mistake. She keeps a close eye on her consort as he cruises nearby, ostensibly gulping down Daphnia. She has already collected up some of her brood, but a number are still swimming freely. She reacts aggressively to the male. He then starts chasing her, but at least it distracts him from eating the young. Three weeks later, enough have survived to engage in a tug of war, though in the wild, other predators would have reduced the numbers much further. Fish overproduce to allow for such casualties. Out of 1,000 eggs in the wild, perhaps fewer than a dozen fish make it to adulthood. The young of the Argentine pearlfish have a different sort of enemy to deal with. The pools and rivulets of the La Plata basin where it lives are subject to violent seasonal fluctuations, from flood to drought. So, its eggs have to be able to cope with the possibility of being left high and dry. The brightly coloured male once again does the digging, while the female stands by to shed her eggs. For such a little fish, the eggs are huge, 1 millimetre in diameter, and have a tough double skin. When the drought comes, they're going to need all the protection they can get. The eggs are laid in a peaty bed. A second female arrives to lay her eggs. Each male mates with as many females as possible. The eggs are fertilized one at a time and buried in individual nests. Spawning continues until October. In December, the drought arrives. As the pools dry up, the adults are marooned and left to die. But beneath the drying beds of streams and ponds, the eggs are safe. Finally, in March, the water returns. fill up again. Down below, in the hard-baked mud, the eggs of the Argentine pearlfish begin to hatch. This delayed action method is used successfully by other aquatic forms, including frogs. In nature, even the most unlikely methods of reproduction work. Like the Siamese fighting fish, the archerfish's name is very descriptive. The archerfish has a unique method of hunting its prey. It is found throughout Southeast Asia and in Australia. It can shoot a jet of water up to 5 meters. Sometimes it just jumps for its prey. When it aims at an insect, it must allow for the angle of refraction at which light bends when striking water. It fires the jet along grooves in its mouth, which form a gun barrel when it closes its jaws. The power comes from rapidly compressing its gill covers. Correctly kept, tropical fish give joy to a lot of people. But it's important to safeguard the places in which they live and to try to reproduce their natural habitats in tanks in the home. Only then will people stand a chance of witnessing these fish's amazing variety of natural behavior.
More wildlife at the same time tomorrow night on 5. Pack your binoculars and khaki shorts and come with